Good afternoon, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to the Dubai Chambers Live one-on-one interview series. My name is Rebecca McLaughlin-Eastham, and I'll be your moderator and presenter for this session. Today, we're joined by around 200 delegates, industry executives and business leaders, with approximately 80% coming from the Dubai and the UAE, and a further 20% from the international community. A very warm virtual welcome to you all. Your contribution and attendance is very much welcomed and appreciated by myself and the Chamber. Business communities in Dubai, and indeed the world over, continue to navigate changing and challenging market conditions, triggered, of course, by global events. Consistency, the highest quality of goods and services, plus sustainability are key to businesses not only surviving, but thriving in both today and tomorrow's world. To find out how market-leading companies are doing this, this Dubai Chamber series is offering you valuable insight. It's a platform in which we'll hear from thought leaders, captains of industry like we have today, and game changers in the local and global sphere of business. Our VIP guests will provide clear and valuable insight into the strategies and steps currently being taken by their company at this unprecedented time. And today we have a highly respected executive waiting patiently in the wings to do just that. Before I introduce you to him and before we get started, I would just like to bring to your attention some key interactive elements of our webinar today. All delegates will have the opportunity to send questions to our esteemed interviewee by using the Ask a Question icon located at the bottom of your screen. We would also encourage you to respond to our poll questions, of which there will be 3 multiple choice questions. I will prompt you to do so when they appear on screen. It is really important for us to get your feedback, and it really helps us take the temperature of the business climate today. In addition, we would encourage you to take notes, but do make sure that you download them before you leave. And you can also chat with your fellow peers via the dialogue box located on the right of your screen. Networking is the name of the game, and we want to make sure that this event is both fruitful and engaging for everybody involved. And so, without further ado, I'm delighted to say that our guest today is Mr. Raghu Malhotra. He is the president for the Middle East and Africa for Mastercard. Raghu, it's fantastic to see you today. A very warm welcome and thank you for being here.
Becca, thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to our dialogue today.
Me too. During our interview, to let the audience know, Raghu and I will touch upon Mastercard's regional collaborations with companies, banks and states, and of course, including cooperation with Dubai government, as well as their efforts to assist SMEs in developing sustainable business models. We'll also cover many bases, from the digital transformation and technology, the rise of e-commerce, to the evolution of the regional payments industry, and of course, Mastercard's strategy in the short and long term. And do stay tuned right until the very end, because we'll also touch upon the company's foundation for good, so important to be creating a lasting corporate, social, and human legacy. And so let's get started. Let's set the scene. Please enjoy this video, which will establish the tone for our discussion today.
Of all the numbers that matter in business, consider this one: 7.7 billion. That's how many people there are on this planet. So every day, we work with banks, merchants, businesses, cities, and governments to solve human needs with human ideas. In the Middle East and Africa, this ambition is paired with unique opportunities for growth and economic diversification. Here, some of the world's richest economies meet some of the most inspiring SMEs. Dynamic new economies are leapfrogging established markets through digital transformation, and a collective aspiration for a more inclusive and digital future is uniting the world's youngest continent and the world's oldest civilization under the same vision. Every capability we build on, every investment we make, and every partnership we enter into supports this vision and Mastercard's mission to improve people's lives. Our technologies are creating a more seamless checkout experience for online shoppers and helping small businesses transact online. Together with our partners, We're helping gig workers access a range of financial services and get included in the financial ecosystem. We have made it easier for people and businesses to move money around the world, make transactions of all kinds safer and more secure, developed new artificial intelligence solutions that work for people, and extended the reach of our real-time payments to pursue our vision of a global economy that works for everyone, everywhere. For this vision to become a reality, we must continue to do well by doing good, empowering small businesses, supporting our communities during challenging times, and preserving our priceless planet for generations to come. As we look into the future, we see the potential for a more inclusive society, connecting 1 billion people to the digital economy and new possibilities, bringing people, businesses, and cities together. At Mastercard, we are here to help our partners and help people, because we believe that when you start with people, you start something priceless.
Welcome back, everybody. Raghu, a very warm welcome again. Let me start by asking you, against the backdrop, as we've touched upon, of the global pandemic, set the tone and the pace for our conversation today. How has Mastercard charted the crisis so far?
So, Rebecca, the first thing is the pandemic has redefined business models, or just the way companies as well as economies actually view the world of today versus the world of tomorrow. So what do I actually mean? So yes, it has been devastating for many industries, but it's also in many ways been a catalyst of change in many industries, including ours. So how consumers used to react to technologies in the past versus how they react to various digital technologies today or out in the future, as an example, has changed. So right here, if I was to look at our part of the world, 73% of the consumers have actually now started to shop online much more than they've ever done before. So that's one example of how there's a change taking place in the industry. And clearly, some of these changes have long-term profound impact, not just in companies like ours, but actually across various industries and various constituents, whether it's consumers, SMEs, how large corps actually respond to this change. So that's one. Now, I talk about online, but the second thing to think of is this a long-lasting trend, or does it reverse itself? And the reality is 30% of these trends are here permanently. So it's not just it's a catalyst to change because the pandemic made us react in such a way. It's there to stay. In many ways, you think about what social media was pre-digital giants like Facebook or some of the others. I think a lot of people question, saying, we are humans, we interact in a particular way. And somehow technology has made you try something, you started to get comfortable with it, and then you kind of created a new normal, which was what I call a hybrid. It's not to say that humans don't interact in the same way in the past, we just interact differently on the social network with them. So I think these are profound changes taking place that affect our industry the most, right? So that's just one side, that's online. Then if I was to just step back and say, what are industries doing against this backdrop? And the reality is that most industries and most companies we speak to, they're spending a lot more on IT infrastructure technology and digital technology than ever before in the past. I think to the tune of an additional $77 billion. So I'm not talking about small quantums of investment. I'm actually talking about industries responding to the new normal, which is a converged digital world, which we sit in the middle of, as being that for me are some of the trends that will shape us for today, but also shape us into tomorrow. Clearly, for us, Mastercard, that clearly means that the digital future is here to stay, and actually how our business model is evolving around that is clearly changed as well. So that's what I would put as the sort of a backdrop to the pandemic. Very unfortunate, devastating, huge impact socially, But catalyst for change, and in some ways, just from an industry standpoint, but hopefully for humankind, that we actually start to respond to the world differently as well. Whether it's sustainability, like you kind of talked about, or actually how we do good for society and what our roles are. So I feel it's time for a lot of change, and that's how we view the pandemic.
As you said, colossal change, big shifts coming, not just in a social and human sphere, but also a commercial and corporate one. We'll come on to those details in a moment, but I want to drill down into what Mastercard has identified as 4 phases of consumer spending shifting during the pandemic. You've alluded to a lot of the recent trends, but can you elaborate on what exactly they are and what the recovery outlook looks like, especially in light of evolving regional payments industry?
So I think like most industries and most companies, that we were a little caught by surprise as well. In terms of how the pandemic hit, right? So we needed a framework on how do we navigate through something like that. And our framework was really about 4 phases. So the first phase was containment, like how do you contain something like this? The second was just getting stability back again in economies and industries. The third one was normalization, and the fourth one is growth again. So at this point of time, most countries are either through the phase of containment or have reached a stage of stabilization. And then you start to see a couple of economies as well as industries start to move towards the normalization sort of phase. And that depends on infrastructure, it depends on the healthcare system, vaccination rates, opening up of corridors, policy, etc. And then comes the growth phase, which is, and for growth means you go back to a growth level above what you saw pre-pandemic. So that's our basic frame of how we looked at the pandemic. And we pretty much apply this model across the world, right? We can see which economy or which industry is at what stage, and therefore we apply the right strategies based on these 4 areas of how the pandemic works through. That was just our frame. You did ask me a second question, which is what do we see happen as things start to come out as well? So I just want to kind of throw out a few facts, and then we can talk a little more about that. So one thing you started to see is there have been savings in many parts of the world. So in various economies, the saving rates have gone up. Clearly, you're sitting at home. There was a saving propensity. They used to go out and get spent. That's come through. So what that will do is, if you look at the 4 phases I talked about, eventually both the first, the saving, and second, remember there were lots of stimulus checks that went out as well. Various governments actually did that. So I think what it will do is start to get some spending back in. So that's one sort of trend to kind of watch out for. 1/5 of the countries globally have reached 90% of the pre-pandemic levels of domestic flight activity. So you start to see the beginnings of that, I would say, not exactly growth, but you start to see normalization starting to come through. So 90%, so back to at that. However, what we do see is that business travel will probably lag domestic travel by 4 months, right? Now, let's see how the corridors open up, but that's another trend for us to watch out on. Some categories have started to show the signs of early revival. So if you start to look at categories like beauty salons or luggage, you started to see now those trends start to show up, which means the people are now mentally gearing up to start to work through based on policy and corridor opening in there as well, right? And then, of course, there's some corridors, and depending, like I said, on policy, things have actually started to normalize again in any case. So that's the broad sort of 2-3 trends that we actually see. I do feel that domestic spend levels and how people now will do holidays out in the future, there could be a slight shift versus what we saw in the past, where the international only holiday could actually make way to much smaller holidays one international and a few staycations, etc., which has different implications for different industries across the board, whether it's the hotel industry, the airline industry, and therefore it will kind of spur different kind of investment levels as well.
It's interesting, and it's pertinent to our conversation you're saying about consumer habits and saving rates obviously having risen, but also online transactions, of course, having gone through the roof. And this seems like the perfect place for me to ask our audience about their spending, if I may be so bold to inquire as to their spending habits. This is our first poll question, if we could have it appear on your screen. And the question is a multiple choice. You have 3 potential answers, and the question is as follows. How satisfied are you with your current online transaction experiences? How satisfied are you with your online transaction experiences? And the answer A is very, very satisfied. Answer B is moderately satisfied, could be better, or C, not at all. So please place your answers now as prompted on screen. And in the meantime, for the next 30 seconds, whilst we collate the data, crunch the numbers, I'll ask you, Raghu, about the trend. It's likely to continue in your eyes that people have become so used now to online spending and the ease and efficiency of it. You do expect this to continue, or will people really head back in their droves to the malls? What do they prefer?
I wish I knew the precise answer to that, Rebecca. So let me hazard an informed guess. It's not exactly a guess. So our data shows that 28 to 30% of this is going to be permanent. So they're going to kind of remain and sustain that sort of that spend level, which is online in there. I feel that just depends on the kind of shopping we do as well. I don't think as humankind we are quite as yet ready to do everything online. There's a bit of touch and feel. It's the experience. And I think what you'll start to see is a blend of what do you want to experience versus what you want to spend money on. And let's see how the world and the consumers kind of react to it. It also depends on actually the access and the convenience you give to consumers. If you don't give them the right access level, I think we're going to struggle to actually just have everything online or everything which is brick and mortar.
Absolutely. Interesting results coming in from our poll. Thank you again to all delegates for taking part. How satisfied are you with your online transaction experiences? Option A, 53% of delegates said they are very satisfied. 47% said moderately so, and 0% obviously for option C, which is not at all. Any surprises there, Raghu?
No, I must revise this 20 to 30% number I keep talking about, given the live poll as well. What would be interesting for me to see is how this poll would have come out if the world had become completely normal, and if you ask them the same question. And I guess that's where, I mean, what access do you give them? How convenient is it? And then how do they want to experience their shopping?
Exactly. Well, you never know. If we meet in 12 months' time, we'll put that question to our delegates again. Hopefully everything will be slightly more normal. Let me come on to another question. And please, to the audience, do continue to send through your questions for Raghu. I shall put them to him. Raghu, what key lessons, and we've touched upon some of them, but what are the key lessons that have been learned from this unprecedented trading period? And what is Mastercard's level of preparedness, if we can call it that, for potential new waves of the pandemic? How do you ensure business stability and sustainability during a crisis like this?
Yeah. So the first thing is, if there was ever a proof point the industry needed to say, hey, what's the right balance to have between short-term versus long-term strategies, I think the pandemic proved that. I think most companies that actually have that balanced growth formula of saying we're really focused on what the right thing to do for businesses in the long term, and actually are taking steps with real proof points and traction versus short-term agility. I think for us, that was probably some of the thing that sustained us the most through the pandemic. So that real balance between what do you do short term versus what's long term. Now, a couple of examples for you. When the pandemic hit, one of the things we did was we actually made a very bold statement. We, like most other firms, we didn't know how long it would last. We actually said we will have no pandemic-related layoffs in 2020. That was a really bold statement to make when most people, when they're looking to see if the revenue curve is starting to flatten or go down, how do you balance the cost curve? And the reason we could do that is, first is we were super clear the long term, we were still committed to. And to actually do that and ensure that you deliver against the long term, you need your employees to actually work towards it, towards the same sort of goal. And actually that paid off huge dividends for us. When you actually make statements like that and those commitments, I'd see that people, the employee base, the culture of the organization really helps you drive towards that. And I thought our employee base and our management actually responded extremely well to that short-term versus long-term trade-off in that. The second is, I think we were helped with the fact that we actually came into the pandemic with momentum with our core business as well. So that actually helped us. So if you're ever looking for a second strategy, the second strategy is, hey, stick to some of the stuff which is core to your being, right? Double down on it and start that diversification effort as you see the world changing through. So for us, I think those were 2 or 3 things that actually stood out during the pandemic. You actually asked saying, how will a firm like ours, how resilient will we be to any other event like that? The reality is what I just talked about is it gives you sets a framework for the culture we have, the long-term strategies that we have, etc. So I feel we are better equipped to handle what I call the peaks and troughs of what we start to see because we kind of have a framework on how we deal with it. Just like we talked about the pandemic, we have a framework on how we deal with it. So I don't think we need any more shocks. The world needs a little bit of normalcy to return. But should there be some, I feel we probably have a formula on how to navigate our way through it as best as we can.
And equally, when it comes to having a strategy and a formula, again, we've touched upon it, but to put more meat on the bone, how has Mastercard's business strategy evolved in this new digital economy, which will lead us nicely into our next poll question? Raghu, what are your thoughts?
So the first thing is, I did talk about, hey, listen, our core business was well placed in terms of the momentum we had. But we also realized along the back, with people talking, you and I said, hey, the pandemic is going to be a catalyst for what the new age digital economies look like. The reality is, we started talking about that way before the pandemic hit us, right? So we had a bit of an advantage, so to say, that we'd start to work towards it. And what do I mean by this new age digital economy? It basically means that you will start to see various industries start to converge together using digital platforms. And that's really the core of what our strategy was in the past. A lot of people know us only for payments, but the fact is we're a well-diversified firm that actually is in data. We actually have various platforms on mobile payment gateways, gateways itself, processing platforms. We have cybersecurity businesses. We have data businesses. Now, this is a journey we started 4 or 5 years back, and that's actually helped us diversify through. So one trend for us around all of this is saying we're very clear that this will be a multi-network world, right? What do I mean by that? It won't just be payments. It will also be account to account, right? And that's some of the acquisitions which we've done. For example, Vocalink, where the interbank account-to-account transfers is something we provide infrastructure for, right? And so on and so forth. We've done other acquisitions around that. Second one is our model of partnership. In the past, we were heavier focused on the FIs, but in the last 3-4 years, because we have multiple capabilities today, our customer base is also diversified. So actually, we deal very heavily with governments. We deal a lot with MNOs, digital players, fintechs, and these are now both partnerships that we've established, as well as actually sometimes we are their customers and sometimes they're our customers. It's no longer the old world of black and white. I think there is a gray that we operate with, and we found our way of how and what we do with each one of these partners differently. Government's a good example. And sometimes we deal with government as policymakers. Sometimes we deal with governments as if they're a commercial entity. Sometimes we actually deal as if we are their customers, right? And that's the big change and shift for our strategy. So Stu, it's digital, but it's a multi-network digital environment. And second, the partnership model looks very, very different today than what it used to look in the past and how it will look in the future.
Well, that leads us nicely to my next poll question. Audience, your thumbs at the ready, please. And the question is, it will appear on screen now, how connected is your business to the digital economy? We can't escape it, we can't ignore it, but are you on the train with us? And the answers are, in terms of how connected your business is to the digital economy, A, very, B, moderately, or C, not at all. Please place your answers now. Raghu, of course, it's a work in progress, isn't it, the digitalization of the world today? But what would you expect to come out on top in terms of the answers from our delegates here?
Yeah. I am hoping they actually say that, I have a feeling they'll say moderately connected, but let's see what they come out. I feel different people are connected in a different sort of way. Like while we actually wait for it, maybe I can just say, I feel how we financially include people is going to be very different out in the future versus what in the past. If you don't give people financial access, you're going to have a problem. That's from a consumer standpoint. The second one is the SMEs. How you get the small and medium enterprises to connect with the digital economy is also an equally important part. So let's see what they say, and then I'm happy to talk about these two elements differently as well.
Well, perfectly on time. The results are in. How connected is your business to the digital economy? Option A, 24% of delegates said that they are very connected with their business. 76%, as we predicted, moderately connected. And option C, 0% not at all, which is gratifying and good to hear. As you said and predicted, yes, that of course is the moderate adoption level. I just want to pick up on SMEs because it's particularly interesting when it comes to Mastercard. Let's talk about the digital gender gap briefly, if we may, in the pandemic, and in particular the findings of Mastercard's Index of Women Entrepreneurs 2020 and the commitment that your business has made to female-led SMEs. Tell me more.
So I should put a bit of a backdrop to as I answer that question. Clearly, there is a gap there, and I think it's incumbent on companies like ours and actually not just ours to actually ensure that that gap is narrowed through. So to that extent, we've made some commitments around that, but I'll come to that in a second. I think I need to put a backdrop of SMEs for a second for our part of the world. The reality is that over 65% of employment happens because of SMEs. Therefore, when you look at the poll questions of moderately connected, that's huge runway and opportunity on one side, but on the other side, that's a gap as well from an SME standpoint. If you can actually get the SMEs, so 65% of employment. However, if I look at the stats, how much working capital is available to SMEs versus what actually gets lent out, that number in this part of the world is less than 10%. That itself is a huge gap on saying you want them to be connected. If they actually do better, they employ more people, that spurs the economy on. So fixing that is a very, very important part. Now, the SME sector did get heavily affected during the pandemic. So that's just the SME broader thing. When you talk to me about the diversity gap within that sector, 82% of the women entrepreneurs around the world were more severely affected by COVID-19, right? So that's one in there. So the second thing which you start to see is there were not enough entrepreneurs coming into the system, women entrepreneurs. Now that number has started to change. In 2019, 35% of tech entrepreneurs were women. Now, that is not at 50-50 as yet, so there exists a gap already. But the fact that you're actually trending towards a 35 is a pretty good signal through. So our commitment was that we will have 25 million women entrepreneurs into the digital economy by 2025. So our commitment was much more on saying, let's take a real bold number here and actually start to close that divide in there. And hopefully that spurs other companies to do the same.
Raghu, thank you. And yes, as you rightly said, such a challenging time for SMEs and the sector, and SMEs entrepreneurs is such a key driver of innovation and economic growth in recent years, not least for Dubai, but so many other key markets. I want to come briefly to a question from the floor. Thank you so much to the audience for sending it through. Do continue to message me. The question is, and it comes from, Vahid Fortuny, I know him well. You have mentioned, Raghu, that international travel will lag by 4 months versus domestic travel. How do you see the appetite for travel to Africa? And which African markets do you see doing better than others? Thank you, Vahid, for that question.
Sorry, Rebecca, the first part of the question was the lag part. Yeah.
Exactly.
So this is based on some of the studies we had actually done a couple of months back. They shouldn't surprise us. Now, the fact is, there is a new norm of how you work out of home and how you interact with your colleagues in any case, right? So the appetite to do the same quantum of business travel will go down, right? And hence there's a lag effect. The second is, I think businesses, big businesses, as well as small businesses, have found a way on how to interact with each other without necessarily having to physically travel to. So they're in a much better organized sector there. That is not actually true for if I look at an end consumer. If you're cooped up at home, you want to have a life beyond just doing your work-related stuff, right? So it's back to what I talked about, saying humans require social interaction and they need experience. They want to experience things, right? Hence that lag between these two. The second is business travel only comes in depending on the state of infrastructure on the health side and policy from government. If corridors are closed, right, and if the bulk of my business is, let's say, with country A, and that corridor is closed, there's no way I'm going there. However, as a consumer, I have multiple choices. If that same country A is closed, I will decide not to go there, but I will go to country B, which is open. And hence that lag coming through. So from an Africa perspective, I think I don't have all the stats on the tip of my fingerprint, but I remember two that were quite clear. One was intra-regional travel into Egypt and UAE. These two, we actually started to see a shift and a change through as well. And then, you start to see other countries as they open up. I think I was reading last week that Mauritius has decided to open up its border the same way as Maldives. Now, Maldives is not part of the Africa continent, but it's a kind of a close proxy. There's a fair amount of travel coming in there. So again, it's hard to give a precise answer of which corridors open up without that policy and the government travel restrictions opening up.
Thank you. Thank you to Vahid for that question from Impact Adventures. We have another question as well in a similar theme. What do you think, asks our delegate, would facilitate more international business travel returning? We've kind of touched upon this, but this when we have no standardization of COVID-19 protocols across borders. Thank you, Kiran, for that question. Raghu, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, just the way people had started to embrace the concept of national IDs and then digital IDs, one trend to look out for is what is called a health passport. The world did agree on a standard ID around the world, which is what we use as a passport to actually travel in and out. I don't think we should be that surprised that if digital infrastructure improves, digital IDs come into being. Therefore, to actually have some sort of health passport that allows you a different access would come through as well. I think these are the things that facilitate both consumer travel as well as business travel. So I don't know how many of you guys, and many of you hopefully have traveled into various parts. And there was a time you weren't allowed to enter some countries if you didn't show them a yellow fever vaccination card, right, or some sort of vaccination card. I've just finished a piece of travel in the US. I was in New York, and they've already started to have, they've started to create policy and frames around vaccinated versus unvaccinated, right? So there was a booking I needed to do for a restaurant, and they were very clear saying, if you're vaccinated, you can do the booking. If you're not vaccinated, you can't do the booking. Other stores, for example, they kind of left it to you, whether you wear a mask or you come in, there was a choice in there. So I feel you'll start to see some sort of standardization that different governments and economies will start to have between each other, just the same way they've created air bubbles between countries for specific things. I suspect that you will start to see some standardization in the world that will spur business travel as well as consumer travel.
Thank you. I hope that answered your question. Thank you to Kurian Chempel of Eastern. Let me come back to Dubai, where we sit and we proudly work. Raghu, as we look towards the end of our Q&A, I want to race through a couple of key questions for you. And one is that Dubai is a member of Mastercard's Global City Possible initiative. Can you tell us a bit more about this and how Mastercard is creating a legacy through its city partnerships? It's really interesting. Tell us more.
So this is really about, we didn't spend too much time on it. One of the big shifts is how we work with governments and other industry and segments, and that's really an infrastructure play. So that's really what we were doing. But if you step back and start to see what are some of the other trends we see, one of the big trends we see is urbanization, right? So by 2050, according to the UN, 2/3 of the world population is going to be in urban centers. Now, if that trend is true, and various industries are actually trying to make the life of consumers and citizens better, but they actually do it at an industry level. Governments are actually talking about saying, how do I do exactly that at 3 levels high, which is the infrastructure level at a city level? Therefore, each player, each industry actually gets to play in that space, but you must provide common infrastructure that allows for that to happen through. And both, we talk about the Dubai, I think you've got the Dubai 2040 Urban Master Plan, and then you've got the Economic Vision 2030 in Abu Dhabi. These two policies or visions are actually addressing exactly this trend and saying we must provide for our citizens much better, more convenient living, more efficient living, and therefore you actually provide a different level of digital infrastructure for them. Some of that could be to eliminate cash and actually go digital. You use different forms of technology, whether it's blockchain, account-to-account infrastructure, payment infrastructure. How do you connect various small and medium enterprises to a digital economy? I'll give you an example. We have a solution for our small and medium enterprises, which is makes them go online in 10 minutes. 10 minutes from start to finish, you're online in 10 minutes, right? Now, these are things that get plugged into what I call the City Possible initiatives. That is the sort of work we're doing. How do you actually, if you actually digitize the whole supply chain in a city, in effect, you have a much more transparent way of looking at how flows work. To my point, hey, once you do that, you probably get better access to working capital. And I said that was a problem. So I think these very high-level City Possible type infrastructure initiatives allow you to play in all of these spaces, and no single entity can do that. It actually happens at a higher level. And that's the sort of work we're actually doing with the UAE federal government, the Dubai government, as well as the Abu Dhabi government, and actually many other governments around Middle East and North Africa, including Egypt and Saudi Arabia as well.
Well, let's take the temperature of the business climate right now. Let's find out how businesses are doing, not least here in Dubai. We have an international and a domestic audience with us today. So let's put another poll question to them, Raghu. The third and final poll question is, which will appear on your screens shortly, what is your business focus at this time? Many challenges, difficult times. What are you focused on in terms of your corporate strategy? Is it A, maximizing profits, boosting those margins? Is it B, reducing overheads, cutting costs, streamlining? Is it C, staff retention and sustainability? So important to the longevity of any company. So please, what is your business focus at this time? A, maximizing profits, B, reducing overheads, C, staff retention and sustainability. The poll is now live. We look forward to seeing your answer. I presume it's going to be a bit of all three, isn't it, Raghu? But in terms of Mastercard going forward, and with increased investment in the adoption of digital technologies, inevitably comes more data protection and cybersecurity concerns. It's pertinent to our discussion today in light of the business climate, the economic climate. How can businesses that we're talking to today protect themselves in this evolving digital world?
So, you know, with the digital economy comes the added responsibility of actually ensuring that data is protected better, not just for the institution that actually creates that digital infrastructure, but for the consumers as well. To some degree, I think some policy that's coming out on data protection, data privacy is actually quite good, but that won't be enough. You have to start to see how vulnerable you are to some of the attacks. In fact, we saw probably some of the studies show that 77% more attacks in the last 12 months than ever before. And these are attacks that don't go into just very large corporates. They actually will go into SMEs as well. And if you think about it, big corporates actually have far more capital to invest and create the cyber defenses around them. What if you're a small and medium enterprise? How do you protect yourself against that? And I think that's some of the work we're also doing with governments, but also with various industry bodies, creating a data trust, for example, for SMEs, by which we actually can do a diagnostic for them. They have access to best tools, etc., where they don't have to spend millions of dollars creating that infrastructure for themselves, but they write off what's called a shared sort of service for them. But think of your world I explained this to somebody a few weeks back, and I said, in the past, you could spend and create and protect yourself by putting multiple layers of security in the same environment. But the world, when it is that connected in the digital side, maybe a different way of thinking about it is saying, I will protect myself in this environment with only one or two layers of security, but then I create a different environment and create a different set of security protocols in there. The reason I say that is it's harder to breach 7 different environments, but it's easier to breach 7 security protocols in the same environment. So our mindset has to shift about that. But you will only be willing to do this if you had better laws and protection around that, and there's this degree of trust in that. So I think it works in tandem in there. But like I said, 77% more attacks on the cyber side because of this digital stuff coming together.
Thank you. I want to stick with the digital theme, but let me just give you the results of the poll. What is your business focused on at this time? Only 10% of delegates said it's all about the bottom line, maximizing profits, just 10%. Option B, reducing overheads, was around 40% of delegates, and 50%, that's half of our audience today, so their business focus, their corporate strategy right now in the pandemic, this new norm, is staff retention and sustainability. Perhaps no great surprise there, but an ever-evolving business model for so many companies in Dubai and further afield. Raghu, let me just return to technology. I have to talk about 5G connectivity. Exciting times. What are the key opportunities that you're seeing with the increased rollout of 5G connectivity across our region?
So first is I'm super excited about that. So 5G versus 4G, a lot of people say, what's the big deal? The big deal is the speed and the reliability, right? So you think of your world. I think many of you might have forgotten. I'm still old enough to remember this. There was a time when I had a mobile phone. If I traveled from one city to the other, I had to get a new number when I went to the city. Or if I traveled between one place to the other, it would not work seamlessly. And now you actually have a network that allows you to travel seamlessly through it. So it gives you connectivity, allows you to do business differently. 5G does all of that and more. There was a time when the buzzword was the Internet of Things. I don't hear that as often nowadays. But if the Internet of Things has to become real, I think 5G is the glue that makes it come alive. Think of what will happen. I have SMEs who want to get connected to the digital world, but they need better security, more reliability, etc. I can now start to convert any of the devices with faster speed and the service comes through. And that has huge implications of what you can do, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's education, or if it's in financial services. For all three, you actually require consistency and stability. And then you put on all the other things we talked about: safety, security, privacy. So I think it's the confluence of all of these three things that come through. So it's not that 5G will transform anything. What 5G does is gives you the base level of connectivity and stability that allows you to take the other things and create something which is bigger. So I see a more connected world. I see how SMEs can get connected faster. I talked to you, they can get connected in 10 minutes. They'll be connected much more reliably if you have these sort of things. I can convert your phone into a payment acceptance device almost overnight when I have that sort of reliability, as an example. And there are many other examples like that. So yes, excited about 5G and what it can do. And hopefully people will start to make that reality of the Internet of Things come together as well.
Very much looking forward to it. Exciting times, as you say, the sky is the limit when it comes to this technology. Audience, just to let you know, you have a few more minutes to send in any last questions that you may have that you would like me to put to Raghu. Raghu, in the meantime, let me come to you and ask about Mastercard being a force for good. So important in these times not to be overlooked in the bigger picture of a corporate strategy. How does it manifest itself in the communities that you operate in? What are the actual manifestations of it, the actual real life examples, for example?
Yeah. Rebecca, you might have heard us say this in the past or heard it from me as well. We have a philosophy in our company of doing well by doing good. So that's embedded in pretty much every single employee and the culture of our firm. And what does that mean? It means you do well and it has to be done in a sustainable manner. And what are precise things that we say we put out? A few years back, we put an audacious goal out there saying we're going to include 500 million of people into the financial formal system. A few months back, we actually achieved that, and we made a second statement. We said we'll include 1 billion people as part of being financially included into digital infrastructure. We made a second commitment, which is saying we're going to include 50 million SMEs into this digital economy, because at this point of time, they're out there. So when we talk about doing well by doing good, I think it's not disconnected from our business. Therefore, it's sustainable. It's just that we apply different models to things like that. That's on one side. The second side is actually ensuring that we actually do well in the economies we're part of. During the pandemic, I think we committed $300 million to actually the fight against COVID. Now that's very specifically, we I think partnered with the Melinda Gates Foundation, actually give some money for further research as an example. A few weeks back, you heard the Mastercard Foundation that announced that it'll actually put up to $1.3 billion for vaccination over the next few years into the African continent. So for us, doing well and doing good it's more than doing CSR activities. It's like, how do you ensure that this is ingrained in how you work every single day, part of your business model, right? So it's financial inclusion, it's SME. You talked to me about the gender diversity gap and some of our commitments around that. It's around doing well in society when we see there are issues that come through. And the last thing is sustainability. We have a priceless planet coalition where we're saying, hey, we need to do our part in doing well and when it comes to climate control, etc. So one of the commitments we made is to plant 100 million trees as part of that coalition. Some of that is in this part of the world. In fact, we are currently in the planning stages of putting 1.3 million trees in Kenya, right, as part of that. So these are some of the real initiatives that we have so that we can bring to life for our employees that they're actually connected to the world outside of Mastercard as well, and they give something back.
It's great to hear, and especially about the trees. They call them the lungs of cities. So yes, the more oxygen we have, the more clean air, the better. That sounds good to me. We have another question that's come through to you from our audience, Raghu. Again, it comes from Kurian. Thank you for your participation today. He says, which global markets do you see coming out strong in Q4 of 2021 and next year? So the fourth quarter, what does it look like? Who's shaping up well?
So super tough questions because some of it just becomes speculation because I can't really predict which wave comes out where and how Asia had started to bounce back and then there's a second wave, it started to regress back. So it's tough to predict that, and that's why I stuck to saying, hey, I see e-commerce being strong, I see some industry sectors being strong, I see domestic travel being strong, and therefore it works through. Hey, there are economies that have started to bounce back. In any case, I think there's a prediction that the MENA economies will actually grow by 2.4%. Remember, most economies are actually regressing at this point of time. We're still in that 4 phases in there. It also just depends on which country and what policy comes through and how do governments open corridors through. We are in a global world where everything is connected through. So it'll be hard for us to predict which economy comes out first versus second. So we'll stick to the sectorial set of prediction and what will do well. I'm sorry, Korean, I'm not giving you a precise answer, but because I don't have something as precise as that. I do have an economist report, which I can send to you offline, that will actually, based on 4 or 5 trends, start to predict out which countries could come out of this faster than the others.
Yeah, interesting one to watch. And as you say, constantly changing because we don't know what's on the horizon. Let me put a final question to you, maybe final. If we have one more from the audience, I can put that to you as well before we wrap up our discussion. But putting the world, the business environment and consumers against the backdrop of the global pandemic and completely different economic norm, the new norm, what do you foresee companies will look like in the future? Another impossible question, a hot potato, as they say, to throw at you, but what do you think, Raghu?
There are many wild theories. One of them, companies, the first part is I think they'll have to reassess what they stand for. So I think the whole dialogue we had about sustainability, what's our role as part of society, etc. I feel some of that will change for sure, right? So, but I'll kind of keep that aside. I've already spoken about that. I think a lot of people, when they talk about companies, we also talk about long-term versus short-term goals. And I think look at the audience and how they pulled through on if profitability and margins was the only thing they cared about, and actually 90% said no, they chose other things. So that's the second bit. I think we'll start to see a shift through. The third one is, what does work life look like for employees and companies? And a lot of people are predicting, saying, I'm not sure we need offices completely, or I'm not 100% there on something like that. I feel probably we'll come up with a hybrid type of model where you have the best of both worlds. So if you have a good connectivity infrastructure for your employees, see, innovation happens not by sitting in isolation in labs. Innovation happens when you talk to each other and you interact with each other in a particular way in a particular environment. Digital or physical doesn't really matter. But what happens is you interact in a particular way. I hear Rebecca say something. I actually have a thought in my own head. what she said helps me build on my own thought process. I evolve that. That's how innovation happens. Somebody tells you a need somewhere, a consumer need, a company need, a gap in the economy. So I just feel the world, as far as companies is concerned, is probably start to understand these things a little better, create environments for the employee base, and how innovation will happen will look a little differently on how we build out. Otherwise, I worry a little bit that we'll all end up just doing tasks and innovation will suffer.
And we wouldn't want that. Innovation so important to the economic ecosystem and the world today. And on that inspirational note, ladies and gentlemen, and Raghu, we have to leave our discussion. It's time for me to extend a very big thank you to my respected guest, Mr. Raghu Malhotra, the President for the Middle East and Africa at Mastercard. His insight and contribution today, I'm sure you will agree with me, has been illuminating and invaluable. Thank you so much, Raghu, for your time.
Rebecca, thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure to catch up with you, this time online rather than physically, but look forward to seeing you soon as well.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Raghu. It's also important for me to thank all of you, our audience, for joining the Chamber this afternoon. We very much hope that you enjoyed the session and found it informative. We would love to have your feedback, so please do look for the feedback icon located in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Just spend a few minutes, if you don't mind, providing us with your comments and your thoughts. We greatly value your insight. Moreover, for those of you who have taken notes during our session today, please don't forget to download them before you exit the platform. So to conclude, and on behalf of Dubai Chamber, we very much look forward to seeing you again at our next executive gathering and interview series. And stay tuned to the Chamber's social media pages and its main website for all upcoming calendar events. On behalf of the Dubai Chamber of Commerce and Industry, thank you again, shukran jazeera, and have a wonderful day. Goodbye.